To the surprise of many, Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba will deliver his first budget speech later today. Debates on whether it will be his last still ongoing. But nonetheless, he will present quite a dismal picture for South Africa. We've got a 51 billion rand hole that we have to plug, and tough decisions have to be made, as he did tell foreign investors at the World Economic Forum earlier this year in January. So we're going to discuss what we should be expecting from the holistic document to be presented to South Africans at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And helping us navigate through that is Craig Pheiffer, who is an investment strategist at Absa Stockbrokers and Portfolio Management, as well as Ferdie Schneider, who is the head of tax at BDO. Perhaps, Ferdie, if I begin with you. So I think in no year has the conversation around the increase in VAT been so loud as it is this year. Why? And do you expect the Finance Minister to do that unpopular thing and increase the VAT rate?
I think one of the main reasons, I think it's always actually been a loud conversation since the mid-90s when it last was increased. But there's always been political pushback on increasing a VAT rate because of its regressive nature. What makes it rather imperative now this year, I believe, for Gigaba to actually increase, there's nowhere else to find the money. We can go to wealth taxes and stuff like that, but that's window dressing. That's not real revenue generators. VAT actually, it's estimated that if you raise it by 1%, it's 20 to 25 billion rand. So you take 2% of that and you can actually close the gap, but for tertiary education funding. If you then standard rate the fuel levy, the fuel as well, as they've mooted in the last 12 months, that could probably raise an additional 15. Then we only have about 25 to close on tertiary education fees.
So it's halfway there with VAT. I mean, you're saying 1%. I've been reading some analysis, and some economists are saying, you know, you raise it by 2%, you'll get around 40 billion there, done. Would he be as harsh as to raise VAT by 2%?
Well, I think if we get past this budget and we don't feel some pain, then they're not doing the right thing. I just feel like they have to. We're going to have to embrace tough measures. It's going to be quite austere, and maybe 2% on the VAT rate is what it takes. VAT does seem to be the one lever, or the only real lever that makes a meaningful difference. Everything else is tinkering around the fridges. A sugar tax here is 3 or 4 billion, but these other, as you talked about, charging VAT on fuel moves the dial. Increasing the VAT rate, maybe 2%, maybe a combination of that, maybe just do one, but you have that. Our team have also mooted potentially a wealth tax in the form of VAT on municipal rates, which is kind of a wealth tax by sleuth, really. But that could also be a bit more meaningful. So VAT does seem to be the lever. It's about a quarter of the revenue we actually get in into the fiscus. And if you look at personal income tax, adjusting the brackets, again, that's just tinkering around the edges and probably more beneficial for the Treasury to the tune of 3 or 4 billion than individuals, although they're going to tell you that how much money you're saving.
I like how we're talking about 2 or 3 billion as essentially being a drop in the ocean. But Ferdie, remind us again, I mean, those who are in favor of a VAT increase say that the minister can simply do this by perhaps adding more goods, more foodstuff to the zero-rated basket. So remind us again, what kind of foods are zero-rated again?
There's 19 food items that's specifically zero-rated, but that's been zero-rated since approximately 1991 already. So the science behind that, I would question by now. If it stayed stable and we can still with certainty, after all those years, what's it, about 27 years now, say that that is still effectively the consumption of the poor or the low income, I'd be very surprised. So I'm not necessarily in the same camp of those guys saying let's increase VAT and expand the zero rating basket. I actually would go for reducing the zero rating basket and actually focusing the money gained from that to assist the poor.
Through how? Social grants?
Social grants, socio-economic infrastructure. If you look at the European now, I mean, we've said that we're not a developed country, But if we look at some of the developed countries, they can lower taxes because they have socio-economic infrastructure. We don't have that in South Africa. Both pay for our own health services, both pay for our own security services, etc. So we get, I think, in South Africa, very little bang for our buck.
I mean, Craig, you were talking about a form of wealth tax by increasing the VAT rate on municipal rates. How would that work?
Well, essentially, I suppose the bigger your house or the bigger your property, the more rates you'll pay, which is a sign of your wealth or an outcome of your wealth. And VAT on top of that municipal rate would really hit those wealthier, those with the bigger houses, the bigger properties more. So it is kind of a wealth tax by stealth. I think one of the other things you're talking about VAT is another, it's more of a luxury
I've heard that as well.
VAT rate. Maybe the good doctor here will tell us why it's not practical to implement. It just seems theoretically that if you make people pay 20% for Ferraris rather than 14 and naught for figs or whatever it is, that maybe that's a solution. But they tell me it's tough to implement.
Yeah, no, I'm also fairly against that, and sorry to differ
No, that's
with
not
you.
just an idea that's mooted out there.
I like
Do you
your
drive a
idea
Ferrari? Do you drive a Ferrari?
I
Is this
can't
why
afford
you?
it. I'm a tax consultant, so no, I don't. I wish. No, I don't think. I think just theoretically, Craig, is that it's sort of been established that dual rates or multiple rates. We've got a dual rate, we've got the zero rate, but multiple rates, introducing a luxury rate, say on Ferraris or whatever, leads to abuse, often leads to abuse. It increases the system administration, the infrastructural cost, etc. So you actually gain very little by that because you're increasing your police force, your SARS police force, to actually make sure that guys don't take the luxury good and classify it down to the less or the more favourable VAT rate. So, but I do appreciate that you want to remove the zero rate on the property taxes, because all the others are actually standard rated, so that would make sense. Because then we're decreasing that zero rate basket that we spoke about.
Look, the Davis Commission's already said that they didn't like that idea of a luxury VAT rate. So it's not very likely, but it is just one of those things that's being discussed at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, what about the public sector wage bill being one of the highest items there on the balance sheet? The President speaking about reducing the size or reviewing the size of some government departments and the like. Would this move the needle if he had to do this?
It would, but I think it's a dual-edged sword. I think you really do want to reduce the size of the public sector and the public sector wage bill. At the end of the day, those people still spend money that goes into the economy. So if you just took it away in a short space of time, you're taking out some of that expenditure from the economy. So a short-term pain, but I think the longer-term gain, we really have to reduce the budget deficit. We have to show that it's sustainable, believable, and that number has to get smaller every year. In October, we just said, okay, this year we're going up to 4.3. The next 3 years, probably because they weren't thinking about it enough, we just said 3.9, wait for the February budget. But that number we have to show is going to get small over time, and have to bring in these believable policies or actions. And one of them would be reducing the public sector, reducing that in size and the wage bill. But I think it would have a short-term impact on economic growth.
Okay, but Ferdie, obviously, in terms of a normal consumer, we should be expecting the regular increases in alcohol, in cigarettes, in things like that deemed sinful.
Yeah, no, I think we'll see the sin taxes, but I don't think government generally relies on sin taxes to really generate revenue. It's hence the term sin tax. I mean, if they push it up to 80 Rand a packet, you can now sense that I'm a smoker. People will still buy the cigarettes. So I don't think that's a fiscal measure. It's more of almost a moral tax, a sin tax in that sense. So we can definitely expect that always goes up.
No, for sure. But then the ultimate thing, this funding free higher education. So that is expected to be, you know, another crucial element we need to be looking out for as to how you do this, where you get the money from. Craig, I mean, where could they possibly get this money from?
Well, I think we've tried to explain how the only levers they've got really, that VAT rate, they have to do something there. Everything else is really tinkering around the edges. The sin taxes as well, probably be just above the inflation rate, but it's going to harness you know, a couple of billion. It also doesn't move the dial. So it's both of those measures, increasing the revenue, reducing the expenditure, and hopefully bringing those two closer together. But now you've thrown in this big amount, additional amount of expenditure, and you know, we have to see where that the revenue is going to come from, or other expenditure cuts. So it's we always say it's a balancing act. The finance minister got to pull a rabbit out of the hat, but I think it's never been truer.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but Craig, I mean, what in the likelihood that they do tinker around the edges or window dress, as you have said it, Ferdie, because, I mean, and it's an election year next year, and that could be very, very unpopular for its voting base right now. What could they do?
Well, I actually think it's opportune to raise the VAT rate now. We've got a new president whom all of a sudden in 9 years we like our president. That's fantastic, I mean, to start off with. So there's an euphoria around the president and the statements that he's made that will actually change this country. So I think he's got so much support at the moment, especially today, that a VAT rate increase is not that far-fetched. I think it's not that politically uncalled for at the moment. But I mean, balancing the budget, if we take the 51 billion shortfall on the revenue, tax revenue side, we take, let's say we max it out to 40 billion on tertiary education, we could probably get there with a 2% VAT rate increase, taxing fuel, and then probably on the personal income tax bracket creep, because they not, if they don't adjust the scales to manage inflation, they will probably gain another 7 to 15 billion there, just by not adjusting it. And that's a silent tax. Nobody actually knows almost about it.
Craig, I mean, just to wrap up, because we are out of time, what about just simply stopping the bleeding at state-owned enterprises? I mean, could that not just, you know, come up with the money because we're not flushing it down the toilet anymore?
Absolutely, that's the answer, but it doesn't happen overnight. And we've got to get going now. Our debt levels are rising at a much faster rate than we predicted this time last year. Our gross debt to GDP is headed to 60%. We start thinking about a public debt trap at those kinds of levels. So we really have to get that budget deficit down now and narrowing into the future. Otherwise, we'll be in serious trouble.
Oh boy, but I don't like 2% VAT increase. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time. All right, now there are those tough decisions that the minister will have to make. 2% increase in VAT, possibly. Wow, and a VAT 14% increase on fuel. Whoa, it's going to be really, really tough. As Craig Pheiffer said, that if we don't come out of this budget feeling some pain, then we possibly have not done the right thing. But I'd like to say goodbye to my guest right now. That is Craig Pheiffer, Chief Investment Strategist at Absa Stockbrokers and Portfolio Management, as well as Ferdie Schneider, who is a PhD, and he's the head of tax at BDO.